Stop looking at the bride. Every eye in this room needs to turn around and look at the man sitting alone at table 12. 200 heads swiveled. 200 pairs of eyes landed on Caleb Turner, and in that moment, heart hammering against Rib's daughter's face flashing through his mind, he understood that sometimes the hardest thing a man can do isn't raising a child alone. It's letting the world finally see him. The voice that cut through the reception belonged to a woman in a black suit standing at the VIP table like she owned not just her chair, but the entire room. Her words carried the kind of authority that didn't ask for attention. It commanded it. My name is Victoria Bennett. I own Cascade Engineering, and we supply components to Boeing. I want to hire that man. The ballroom went silent. Not because I pity him, because 30 minutes ago he did something 5 of my engineers with degrees couldn't do. Caleb sat frozen, the weight of 200 stairs pressing down like a physical thing. 3 weeks ago, this invitation had lived under a stack of bills on his kitchen counter, and he'd told himself he'd never use it. Weddings were for people who belonged to the world of ties and cocktail conversation, people who knew how to exist in rooms like this without feeling like an imposter. He was a mechanic, 48 years old, $22 an hour hands that smelled like motor oil no matter how hard he scrubbed. The vest he wore had been purchased in 2009 for a cousin's wedding, the last time he'd forced himself into a room full of strangers who'd want to know what he did, who he was, why he showed up alone. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, with Marcus Reynolds' handwriting on the envelope. Marcus, his college roommate from another lifetime back when Caleb still believed the world had a place for him beyond survival mode. The card had stayed buried because showing up meant risking exactly this visibility. Lily had found it that Friday morning, standing in the kitchen doorway with the envelope in her hand and that look on her face, the one that said she saw through every excuse her father had spent 15 years perfecting. "Dad, you're going." He'd looked up from the newspaper. He wasn't actually reading the same newspaper he bought every morning because routines were safe and predictable. "I never said I wasn't. You hid the invitation under the electric bill. I was organizing. You were hiding." She'd crossed the kitchen then, all 17 years of her, with her mother's sharp eyes and a determination that was entirely her own. "Marcus is your friend. He specifically called to make sure you were coming. He said if you try to ghost his wedding, he's showing up at our house with a mariachi band." That had pulled a smile, brief as it was. Marcus would absolutely follow through on that threat. "It's not that simple, Lil. Explain to me what's complicated about it." Lily had sat down across from him, and suddenly she wasn't his teenage daughter anymore. She was a young woman with a spine made of steel, looking at him like she could see every wall he'd built brick by brick. You buy a suit, which you already have. You show up to a church, watch 2 people promise to love each other, eat some cake, and come home. People do it all the time. People with dates do it all the time. The words had come out before he could stop them, and he'd watched her expression shift from frustration to something dangerously close to pity. "Dad, I'm not looking for sympathy, I'm just stating a fact. Weddings are couples' events. I'm not a couple, haven't been one in 15 years. Showing up alone to watch everyone else celebrate their partnerships isn't exactly appealing, so don't go alone. Who exactly am I supposed to take Mrs. Patterson from next door? She's 83 and has a better social life than I do." Lily hadn't laughed. Instead, she'd reached across the table and placed her hand over his, a gesture so tender and so impossibly grown up that it made him realize not for the first time that somewhere along the way, his little girl had become the one keeping him anchored. "I want you to go. Not for Marcus. For you." Her voice had dropped then, soft but unrelenting. "You've spent my entire life making yourself invisible, Dad. You dropped out of everything. The softball league, the poker nights, the neighborhood barbecues. You never date. You barely have friends anymore. And I know why you did it. I know you gave everything up to take care of me. I love you for that, but I'm 17 now. I'm leaving for college next year, and I need to know that when I'm gone, you're not going to just disappear." Her voice had cracked on that last word, and something inside Caleb's chest had cracked right along with it. He'd always known this conversation would come the moment when his daughter looked at the fortress he'd built around their life and saw it for what it really was. Protection, yes, but also a prison. What if I go, and I'm miserable? Then you leave early, and I make you pancakes when you get home. And what if everyone looks at me like I'm some kind of charity case? The poor single dad who couldn't move on. Lily had squeezed his hand. Then you remember that their opinions don't pay our mortgage. They didn't sit with me through nightmares when I was little. They definitely aren't the ones who taught me how to change a tire in the rain. He'd stared at his daughter, this fierce, brilliant creature he'd somehow managed to raise, and felt something loosen in his chest. Fear, probably. The kind that had kept him locked away so long, he'd forgotten there might be something worth stepping out for. One condition. Name it. If I'm miserable, you make chocolate chip pancakes. Not regular. Lily's face had broken into a grin. Deal. So he'd gone. Put on the vest that didn't quite fit right, any more polished shoes that hadn't seen daylight in years, and driven his 2008 F-150 to the Fairmont Olympic Hotel in downtown Seattle. The building rose up like a monument to everything Caleb wasn't. Historic elegance. Old money, the kind of place where presidents stayed when they visited the Pacific Northwest. A bronze plaque by the entrance read, Est, 1924, where presidents stay. Just in case anyone forgot they were walking into a piece of American history. The lobby stretched 15 feet high, crystal chandeliers catching afternoon light and throwing it across marble floors, red carpet brass fixtures, everything polished to the kind of shine that made Caleb acutely aware of his scuffed boots and the cologne he'd borrowed from a bottle that was probably older than Lily. People moved through the space with the ease of belonging couples in expensive fabrics, men in suits that fit like they'd been born wearing them, women in dresses that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage. Caleb stood near the elevator bank trying to look like he had business being there, like he wasn't a 48-year-old mechanic who'd spent the drive over contemplating every exit strategy. The elevator doors opened and a woman stepped out. She wore a black Armani suit, not that Caleb knew brands, but the cut and fabric announced money the way a Rolex announces time. Hair pulled back severe and professional, not a strand out of place. Her face had the kind of angles that belonged in magazines, sharp cheekbones and a jawline that suggested she didn't waste time with nonsense. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold, assessing the eyes of someone who'd learned to measure threats before they became problems. She looked like a CFO, or maybe a corporate lawyer, definitely not a wedding guest. The elevator she'd exited made a noise behind her, a grinding metallic complaint that Caleb's ears caught immediately. Bearing wear probably 6 months overdue for maintenance, the kind of sound that meant breakdown was coming soon and it wouldn't be pretty. This elevator broken. Her voice matched her appearance, crisp, efficient, no patience for wasted words. Sounds like it. Bearings going bad, needs oil or replacement. She turned to look at him properly, then those cold eyes taking inventory. Assessing whether he was hotel staff, a guest, something else entirely. Are you an engineer with the hotel num? I'm a guest, but I'm a mechanic. Mechanic. She said it without inflection, not dismissive, not impressed, just filing away information. Then she extended her hand and Caleb shook it, surprised by the firmness of her grip. Victoria Bennett. He glanced at the guest badge clipped to his vest pocket, the one with his name printed under Guest of Marcus Reynolds. Caleb Turner. Victoria Bennett nodded, once released his hand, then turned toward the stairwell without another word. Her heels clicked against marble in a rhythm that sounded like counting down to something. Caleb watched her go, that strange feeling settling in his gut, the one that said he'd just encountered something significant even if he didn't understand why yet. He took the stairs, The ballroom on the third floor could hold 500 people easily, though today it hosted half that number. Round tables draped in white cloth centerpieces of roses and hydrangeas, a stage where a string quartet played something classical that Caleb didn't recognize. The whole setup screamed expense and planning, the kind of wedding that took a year to coordinate and cost more than some people's cars. Marcus stood near the entrance greeting guests with Jennifer, his bride-to-be. When he spotted Caleb, his face lit up with genuine surprise. "You came." The hug was full body, the kind Marcus had always specialized in, no half measures, no polite back-patting. "I told you I would. You tell me a lot of things. Doesn't mean I believe them." Marcus released him and turned to Jennifer, a marketing director with kind eyes and patience Caleb had always admired. "Jennifer, you remember Caleb, of course. Thank you for coming." The exchange was warm but brief. They had 100 other guests to greet. Marcus clapped Caleb on the shoulder once more before turning to the next arrival, and Caleb found himself adrift in the crowd looking for his table assignment. Table 12. He found it in the back corner near the service entrance and the DJ booth. Not quite hidden, but close enough to the periphery that leaving early wouldn't cause a scene. The universe, it seemed, understood his needs. 6 chairs were already occupied when he arrived. 2 couples in their 40s, polished professional, the kind of people who worked at Microsoft or Boeing and spent weekends at wine tastings. An older couple, retired engineers by the look of them, comfortable in their skin and each other. 1 empty chair remained. Caleb took the seat facing the wall. Old habit. Walls were safe. Walls meant you couldn't be flanked, couldn't be surprised, could see everything in front of you without worrying about what approached from behind. "So, how do you know?" "Marcus." The question came from the older man, Jim Crawford, as he'd introduce himself. A retired Boeing engineer with kind eyes and genuine curiosity. "We were roommates at University of Washington. 26 years ago." "Oh. And what do you do now?" The question everyone asked. The question Caleb had learned to dread because the answer never fit smoothly into rooms like this. "I'm a mechanic." 3 seconds of silence. Not hostile silence, not judgmental, just the awkward quiet of people who didn't know how to respond to that information. The 2 Microsoft couples exchanged glances. Jim's wife Susan smiled politely. No one was rude. No one had to be. The silence did the work. Jim recovered first, trying to bridge the gap. "Well, that's important work. Cars, machinery." Caleb nodded, forcing a smile that probably looked as tired as it felt. "I work on most things. Cars, CNC machines, HVAC systems, industrial motors." One of the Microsoft husbands, Brian, leaned forward slightly. "Do you have an engineering degree, number trade school?" 2 years at Renton Technical College. The conversation died there. Brian's wife, Rachel, quickly changed the subject to something about the ceremony starting soon, and just like that, Caleb became invisible again. Not through cruelty, not through intention, just through the natural order of things, people gravitating toward their own kind, their own language, their own comfortable conversations. This was why he avoided weddings, why he avoided any gathering that required him to explain himself to strangers who'd inevitably wonder why a 48-year-old mechanic showed up alone to a Saturday wedding. His phone buzzed, a text from Lily. "How is it?" He typed back, "Exactly what I expected." 3 dots appeared then. "Give it time. You might surprise yourself." Caleb pocketed the phone and reached for his water glass, the ice already melting in the late afternoon heat, when a voice cut through the ambient noise of the reception. "Excuse me, is this table 12? Everyone turned. Victoria Bennett stood there in the same black suit, the same severe posture, but something about her presence made the entire table sit up straighter. She held a small clutch purse and a table assignment card, her eyes scanning the group with that same assessing quality Caleb had seen by the elevators. Jim stammered slightly. "Yes, you're Victoria Bennett. I'm the diamond sponsor for the wedding." She pulled out the empty chair next to Caleb and sat down, her movements precise and controlled. When her eyes landed on him, something flickered recognition. "Mr. Turner, we meet again." Caleb stood reflexively, the instinct of a man raised by a Navy father who'd drilled manners into him like Morse code. "Ms. Bennett, I didn't realize you were at this table." Marcus arranged it. Apparently he thought I needed to mingle with guests instead of sitting at the VIP table. She set her clutch down and turned her attention back to Caleb. "How's the elevator still making noise? No one's fixed it yet. The hotel's maintenance staff is inadequate." She said it matter-of-factly, then addressed the rest of the table with the same crisp efficiency. "I should introduce myself properly. I'm the CEO of Cascade Engineering. We manufacture aerospace components for Boeing and defense contractors." That got everyone's attention. Brian, the Microsoft manager, leaned forward with renewed interest. "Cascade, you just signed that $50 million contract with Boeing, didn't you? FAA approved our new components last month. We're scaling production now." Suddenly, Caleb wasn't the most interesting person at the table, he was the least. Victoria commanded attention the way gravity commanded objects, pulling focus without effort. Then she turned back to him. "Mr. Turner, you mentioned you work on CNC machines. Do you have experience with industrial air compressors?" "Some. I worked 5 years at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. They run Solaire and Ingersoll Rand units. I maintained the whole fleet." Victoria's eyes sharpened, not with skepticism, but with something closer to calculation. "Solaire. 375 horsepower series. Yeah. And the 425 HP rotary screw models." "Why?" "Because my facility runs 12 Solaire 375 HP units. American-made, Michigan City, Indiana. Reliable machines when properly maintained. But Unit 7 has been down for 3 weeks. My engineering team can't diagnose it. They're recommending a complete system replacement at $220,000. Caleb shifted into diagnostic mode without thinking, the way 25 years of troubleshooting had wired his brain. Pressure drop or complete shutdown. Complete shutdown. Machine starts fine runs for 15 minutes, then overheats and trips the thermal sensor. Auto shutdown. They check the intercooler. They check the intake filter. Not the intake filter. The internal intercooler filter. If someone used the wrong cutting fluid, probably a Chinese knockoff to save money, metal shavings get into the coolant line. Clogs the intercooler tubes. Machine overheats, but it's not the motor that's failing. Victoria leaned back slightly, studying him with an intensity that made Caleb acutely aware of the entire table listening. "My engineering team. 5 people with degrees from Purdue University of Michigan, Georgia Tech, didn't mention the intercooler filter because it's not textbook knowledge, it's field experience. I saw this problem 3 times at the shipyard. Contractors use cheap fluid to pocket the difference between what they charge and what it actually costs. They save $200 and destroy a $300,000 machine in the process." The words came out with more heat than Caleb intended, the frustration of watching good equipment ruined by cutting corners bleeding through his professional filter. Victoria set down her water glass with deliberate precision. "Mr. Turner, are you busy Monday?" The question landed like a depth charge. "I work at a garage in Renton." "Why?" "Because I need someone who knows the difference between textbook theory and real-world application. My engineers are brilliant at calculations, but when a machine breaks, I need someone who can fix it, not someone who can explain why it's broken." The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the DJ's voice cut through the ambient noise, announcing the start of the ceremony. Marcus and Jennifer would be walking down the aisle soon, but Caleb couldn't move, couldn't process what Victoria Bennett, CEO of a $200 million company, was implying. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the white tablecloth. "Cascade Engineering, 4500 Boeing Access Road, Renton. Monday, 7 a.m., $500 an hour. If you diagnose the compressor and I don't lose $200,000 on a replacement, you've earned it. If you can't fix it, I've lost $4,000 trying. That's a business decision I can live with." Caleb stared at the card. Heavy stock embossed lettering, the kind of card that announced legitimacy before you read a single word. I make $22 an hour, and Monday you'll make $500. The question is whether you're willing to find out if you're worth it. The ceremony began. Music swelled. Everyone stood as Jennifer appeared at the far end of the ballroom, her dress catching light like captured moonlight, Marcus standing at the altar with tears already streaming down his face. But Caleb barely registered any of it. His entire focus had narrowed to the business card in his hand and the woman sitting beside him, who'd just offered him more money in one day than he made in 3 weeks. I don't want charity. Victoria's expression didn't change, but her voice carried an edge that could cut glass. This isn't charity, Mr. Turner. This is business. I need a compressor fixed. You claim you can fix it. If I'm wrong about you, I lose $4,000 and some pride. If you're wrong about yourself, you lose 1 day and the chance to prove your skills are worth more than $22 an hour. So I'll ask again Monday, 7 a.m. Yes or no? Lily's voice echoed in his head. You've been invisible for 15 years, Dad. When I leave for college, what happens to you? Marcus stood at the altar, crying unashamedly as Jennifer walked toward him, and Caleb thought about all the ways a man could disappear through death, through choice, through simply deciding that being unseen was safer than risking the world's judgment. He thought about his daughter who'd pushed him out the door this morning with the fierce certainty that he deserved more than the shadows he'd learned to inhabit. He thought about Sarah, who'd walked out 15 years ago with nothing more than a note that said, "I can't do this," leaving him with a 2-year-old and the crushing certainty that he wasn't enough for anyone. And he thought about the business card in his hand, heavy with possibility and terror in equal measure. Monday, 7 a.m. I'll be there. Victoria nodded, once no smile, no celebration of his answer. Just acknowledgement. Good. Wear work clothes, bring your tools. And Mr. Turner. Yes. Don't disappoint me. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and tears and applause Caleb barely heard. His mind had already jumped ahead to Monday morning, to the factory he'd never seen, to the machine he'd never touched, to the moment when he'd have to prove that 25 years of field experience meant something in a world that valued degrees over dirty hands. Dinner arrived, chicken or salmon champagne toasts, speeches from Jennifer's maid of honor and Marcus's best man. The table made polite conversation about Boeing's latest contracts and Microsoft's quarterly earnings, and Caleb contributed nothing because his thoughts were 3 days in the future standing in front of an industrial compressor with Victoria Bennett watching to see if he could deliver on the confidence he'd projected. Then Marcus took the microphone. I want to thank everyone for coming. Jennifer and I are overwhelmed by your support. But before we continue, I need to talk about someone specific. The spotlight swung across the ballroom and Caleb's stomach dropped as it landed on table 12. Caleb Turner, my college roommate. The best man I know, even though he wouldn't let me give him that title officially. Laughter rippled through the crowd, but Caleb felt like he was drowning 200 pairs of eyes pinning him in place like a specimen under glass. In 2009, Caleb's wife left, just walked out one day, left him with a 2-year-old daughter and no explanation. I asked him what he was going to do. He said, and I'll never forget this, I'm going to be a dad. The ballroom went quiet. 15 years. Caleb raised Lily alone, worked 2 jobs for the first few years, taught her to change a tire, read blueprints, be honest, and work hard. Now she's 17, full scholarship to University of Washington for engineering 4.0 GPA. When I asked her what her secret was, she said, my dad taught me that a person's value isn't measured by their degrees. It's measured by what they do when nobody's watching. Something hot and sharp built behind Caleb's eyes. He forced it down, forced his face into neutral, forced himself to breathe through the weight of attention. Caleb's been invisible too long. By his own choice, because he thought taking care of his daughter meant disappearing. But today, I want everyone to see him. Because heroes don't need capes. Sometimes they just need someone to notice they've been carrying the world on their shoulders and never asked for help. Applause erupted. Caleb's face burned. He wanted to sink through the floor to become actually invisible instead of just feeling that way. Then Victoria stood up. The applause died immediately, confused by this breach of protocol, this interruption of Marcus's moment. "Excuse me. My name is Victoria Bennett, CEO of Cascade Engineering. I'm the diamond sponsor for this wedding." Her voice cut through the space with surgical precision. 30 minutes ago, I was trapped in an elevator. Mr. Turner, the mechanic Marcus just introduced, manually opened the door and got me out. He didn't know who I was. He just saw someone who needed help. She paused, letting that sink in. 5 minutes ago, he diagnosed a compressor problem my engineering team couldn't solve in 3 weeks. He identified it in 2 minutes just from my description. No tools, no access to the machine, just experience. Victoria turned to look at Caleb directly. "Mr. Turner, I want to hire you. $500 an hour. Monday, 7 a.m. Cascade Engineering, 4500 Boeing Access Road. Can you be there?" The ballroom held its collective breath. Caleb stood because sitting felt wrong, felt like accepting defeat before the fight started. His legs shook slightly, but his voice came out steady. "I make 22 an hour at a garage, and Monday you'll make 500 working for me. If you fix that compressor, I save $200,000. If you can't, I'm out $4,000 for the attempt. That's the best business decision I'll make this week. So I'll ask again. Can you be there, Caleb?" Thought about Lily's text. Give it time. You might surprise yourself. He thought about 15 years of waking up to an empty house, empty bed, empty life except for his daughter and the machines he fixed, because machines made sense in ways people never did. He thought about what it meant to be seen. Really seen not as a charity case or a cautionary tale, but as someone with skills that mattered, experience, that counted value, that extended beyond the hourly wage printed on his paycheck. Monday, 7 a.m. I'll be there. Victoria nodded. No smile, no warmth, just that same clinical acknowledgement. Good. This is my card. Bring your tools. She sat down. The moment broke. Applause started again, confused and enthusiastic in equal measure, and Marcus raised his champagne glass with a grin that suggested he'd orchestrated this entire thing. But Caleb barely registered any of it. The rest of the reception passed in fragments, dancing. He didn't participate in cake. He didn't taste conversations that washed over him without penetration. His mind had already left the ballroom, already jumped ahead to Monday morning, and the terrifying possibility that he might finally be worth more than $22 an hour. He left at 10:30 earlier than planned, but later than he'd originally intended. Walked to his F-150 in the parking lot, sat behind the wheel without starting the engine, and pulled out his phone. Texted Lily. Something happened. Her response came in seconds. Tell me everything. A CEO just offered me $500 an hour to fix a machine. OMG, Dad, are you serious? Dead serious. Monday morning. I knew it. I knew if you just showed up, something would happen. Caleb stared at the messages, then at the business card sitting on his dashboard, then at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked the same tired, weathered the face of a man who'd spent 2 decades working with his hands in all weather. But something had shifted behind his eyes, some pilot light that had been extinguished 15 years ago when Sarah walked out. Hope, maybe. Or just the possibility of it. He started the truck and headed home, the city lights of Seattle falling away behind him as he drove toward Renton, toward the small house he'd raised his daughter in, toward the life he'd built one careful day at a time. Lily met him at the door before he could get his keys out, still in her pajamas, laptop tucked under one arm. Tell me everything. Every single detail. So he did. The elevator, Victoria's cold assessment, the dinner conversation about compressors, Marcus's speech that had made him want to disappear. Victoria standing up and offering him $500 an hour in front of 200 people. Lily listened without interrupting, her eyes getting wider with each detail until finally she threw her arms around him with enough force to make him stagger. "I'm so proud of you. I haven't done anything yet." "Yes, you have. You said yes. For 15 years you've said no to everything, to friends, to opportunities, to life. Today you said yes. That's everything." Caleb held his daughter and felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he'd mortared brick by brick for a decade and a half. Behind it was fear. Yes, the terrifying certainty that Monday he might fail, might prove that 22 an hour was exactly what he was worth. And Victoria Bennett would realize her mistake. But behind the fear was something else. Something that felt dangerously close to excitement. What if I can't fix it? Then you come home and I make you chocolate chip pancakes and we figure out what's next. But Dad, you're going to fix it. Because that's what you do. You fix things. Sunday passed in preparation. Caleb pulled his toolbox from the garage, Snap-on tools purchased in 2005, maintained with the same care he gave to any equipment worth keeping. He checked his multimeter, inspected his torque wrench, made sure every socket and extension had its place. Lily helped iron his work shirt, a Carhartt flannel with the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard logo still visible on the pocket, a ghost from his previous life. She insisted on making him a real breakfast Monday morning, eggs, bacon, toast, fuel for whatever the day would bring. "You look like a master mechanic." "I'm just a mechanic, Lil." "No, you're a master. And tomorrow, you prove it." Caleb left the house at 6:15 Monday morning, giving himself 45 minutes for a 20-minute drive, because arriving early meant control, meant not letting circumstances dictate his position. The F-150's engine turned over smooth and reliable, and he headed north on I-405 as the sun started painting the Cascade Mountains in shades of gold and orange. Cascade Engineering sat just off Boeing Access Road, a 3-story structure of steel and glass that stretched across 5 acres of industrial park. The sign out front read, "Cascade Engineering Corp., American-made since 1985. Supplier to Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman." American flags flanked the entrance, and the parking lot was already half full with Ford trucks, Chevy Silverados, the vehicles of people who worked with their hands. Caleb parked in the back row, old habit, leave the close spots for people who need them, and grabbed his toolbox. 40 pounds of equipment that had seen him through 2 decades of work, the weight familiar and grounding. The security guard at the entrance was maybe 50 ex-military by the bearing and the haircut. He looked at Caleb's work clothes and toolbox with professional skepticism. "Help you, I have an appointment with Ms. Bennett. 7 a.m. Ms. Bennett, the CEO. The guard's expression shifted from professional to openly doubtful. "You sure about that?" Caleb pulled out Victoria's business card. "She hired me to look at a compressor." The guard studied the card, then reached for his phone. 30 seconds of quiet conversation, then his entire demeanor changed. "Yes, ma'am. Right away." He hung up and looked at Caleb with new respect. "Ms. Bennett's waiting for you on floor 2. Follow me, sir." Victoria Bennett stood at the window of her corner office watching the production floor below through reinforced glass that muted the industrial symphony of CNC machines and welding torches. She'd changed since the wedding. No suit today, just a white blouse and black slacks, her hair pulled back in a functional ponytail that suggested she had no patience for aesthetics when work needed doing. "Mr. Turner, you're punctual. I value that." Caleb set his toolbox down, hyper-aware of the oil stains on his Carhartt shirt, the worn Red Wing boots that had seen 1,000 job sites. This office probably cost more to furnish than his entire house. Always arrive 15 minutes early. Navy habit. Her eyebrow lifted fractionally. "You were military 4 years. Machinist mate on the USS Abraham Lincoln. Then 5 at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard before I went private sector." Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Not warmth exactly, but a recalibration. She gestured to the window. "Cascade Engineering. My father, George Bennett, founded it in 1985. Korean War veterans started with 5 people in a rented garage and 1 small Boeing contract. Now, we employ 300 revenue, 200 million supply every major aerospace manufacturer in America. Her voice carried no pride, just statement of fact. Is he still involved? Died in 2018. Cancer. Before he went, he made me promise something. She turned from the window, meeting Caleb's eyes directly. Never sell this company to outsiders. These are American jobs, American manufacturing, American blood. Keep it here, and you have, through a divorce, through COVID, through investors who wanted to outsource to Mexico, where labor costs 1/3 of what I pay. I told them no. 300 families depend on this facility. I don't abandon them for margin points. The words carried weight that went beyond business personal conviction wrapped in corporate language. Caleb recognized the tone because he'd used it himself when explaining why he worked 2 jobs rather than let Lily see him struggle. My father taught me that business isn't just profit, it's responsibility. To your workers, your community, your country. If I only cared about money, I could have sold 6 years ago and retired to Hawaii. But this company is his legacy. I won't let it fail because of a broken machine. She moved toward the door. Ready to see what you're up against. The production floor hit Caleb like a wall of organized chaos. 3 shifts ran this place 24/7, metal being shaped into components that would eventually fly at 30,000 feet. The noise alone would have overwhelmed someone unfamiliar with industrial environments. But Caleb had spent enough years in shipyards and factories to find the rhythm underneath each machine, contributing its voice to a larger mechanical orchestra. They walked through the main floor toward the compressed air system in the back corner. 12 Solaire units painted industrial blue, each one the size of a compact car. 11 humming with steady operation, while number 7 sat dark with red warning lights and yellow caution tape. 5 men stood around the silent machine. 4 younger engineers in lab coats with tablets, and 1 man in his 30s wearing a Purdue University shirt, clipboard in hand, expression already defensive. Victoria's voice cut through the ambient noise. "Gentlemen, this is Caleb Turner. He'll be assessing Unit 7. The Purdue shirt stepped forward. "Ms. Bennett, with respect, who exactly is he?" "A specialist I hired." Caleb registered the careful word choice. Not mechanic or contractor. Specialist. A specialist. "Does he have certification engineering credentials?" "I don't see him on our approved vendor list." Caleb kept his voice level. "No engineering degree. I'm a mechanic with 25 years field experience." Purdue shirt's face tightened. "Ma'am, this is a $280,000 machine. One wrong move and we compromise the entire air system. I can't allow someone without proper credentials, Mr. Mitchell." Victoria's voice dropped 10 degrees. Caleb watched the engineer's spine straighten reflexively. "You graduated summa cum laude from Purdue. I remember because I hired you 5 years ago specifically for that education. In those 5 years, you've been an exceptional chief engineer." "Thank you, ma'am, but..." "However, 3 weeks ago, Unit 7 failed. Your team has been unable to diagnose the problem. Production is losing $50,000 per day. I gave you 3 weeks. Now I'm giving Mr. Turner 8 hours. If he fails, we proceed with your recommendation, order a new motor for $220,000. If he succeeds, you learn something valuable about the difference between theory and practice." Mitchell's jaw worked, but he nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria gestured to Caleb. "The machine is yours. Whatever you need, David provides it." Clear crystal. She walked away, heels clicking on concrete, leaving Caleb facing 5 engineers who looked at him like he'd just claimed he could fly. Mitchell crossed his arms. "All right. Walk me through your symptoms. Machine starts normally, runs 12 to 15 minutes. Temperature climbs from 180 Fahrenheit to 240. Thermal sensor trips. Auto shutdown. We've checked bearing wear, fine. Oil levels, fine. Coolant, fine. When did you last start it?" "This morning." 6:30, same failure pattern. Start it again. I need to hear it run." Mitchell nodded to one of the younger engineers who punched the start sequence. The Solaire roared to life, a deep mechanical growl that Caleb felt in his chest as much as heard. He moved closer, placing his ear near the housing years of diagnostic work teaching him to read vibration and sound like a language. The motor sounded clean. No bearing rattle, no shaft wobble. But the intake, the rush of air being pulled into the compression chambers, felt subdued. A Solaire 375 HP should pull 1,750 cubic feet per minute. This one wasn't hitting that mark. "Shut it down." The engineer complied. Silence rushed back in, punctuated by the ambient noise of the facility. Caleb knelt beside the unit, found the side access panel secured with 12 bolts. He pulled his socket set from the toolbox, selected the right size by touch, and started removing fasteners. Mitchell watched with barely concealed skepticism. "What are you doing?" "Checking the intercooler filter. We already checked the intake filter. It's clean." "Not the intake filter, the internal intercooler filter. Sits between stage 1 and stage 2 compression. If it's clogged, your airflow drops and heat builds up faster than the cooling system can handle. That filter gets changed every 6 months. Morrison Industrial did it last month. Then Morrison lied to you." Caleb removed the panel, reached into the housing, and extracted a cylindrical filter roughly the size of a coffee can. He held it up to the fluorescent lights. The filter was black with accumulated debris particles of metal shavings visible even from 3 feet away. Impossible. Mitchell grabbed the filter, examined it closely. His face went pale. The manufacture date, August 2022. This is 2 years old. They didn't replace it. And see those metal particles? That's aluminum and steel from cutting operations. Someone used the wrong cutting fluid, probably Chinese knockoff instead of American-made Mobil DTE. No rust inhibitors, so metal oxidizes and throws particles into the air system. Clogs your filter, restricts flow machine, overheats. Mitchell stared at the filter like it was evidence of a crime, which in a sense it was. Holy shit. You're right. Caleb walked to the nearest CNC machine, opened the coolant reservoir, dipped his finger in the fluid, and brought it to his nose. The smell was wrong, cheap synthetic. Nothing like the petroleum base of genuine Mobil product. This isn't Mobil DTE. This is generic fluid, probably costs $8 a gallon instead of 40. Morrison bought cheap, charged you for premium, pocketed the difference. Meanwhile, your machine eats metal shavings until it chokes. One of the younger engineers spoke up, voice uncertain. But Morrison said we needed a complete motor replacement. $220,000. And who do you think would bid on the installation contract Morrison gets? The replacement work makes another $50,000 in fees. They break your equipment, then charge you to fix it. Mitchell's expression shifted from defensive to furious. Son of a bitch. I need to tell Ms. Bennett immediately. Do that, but first let's fix this machine. The next 3 hours passed in focused work. Caleb requisitioned a new filter from Cascade's parts inventory, spent 90 minutes cleaning metal debris from the intercooler tubes using compressed air and careful manual work. He checked the thermal sensor calibration with his multimeter, verified oil lines were clear, supervised, while David ordered genuine Mobil DTE fluid to replace the contaminated coolant. The younger engineers watched with increasing interest, asking questions that Caleb answered while working. How do you know which sound means bearing failure versus alignment issues? How do you diagnose flow restriction without pressure gauges? The questions came from genuine curiosity, not skepticism, and Caleb found himself teaching in a way he hadn't since Lily was young and wanted to understand how everything worked. By 11 a.m., Unit 7 was ready for testing. Caleb wiped his hands on a shop rag, stepped back from the machine. Fire it up. David initiated the start sequence. The Solaire caught immediately, that deep mechanical growl sounding cleaner, now healthier. 5 minutes passed. 10, 15, 30. Temperature held steady at 185 degrees. No thermal trip. No shutdown. It's running. David's voice carried disbelief and relief in equal measure. Running because the problem got fixed properly. Mitchell stepped forward, extending his hand. Caleb shook it, surprised by the firmness of the grip. I underestimated you, Mr. Turner. I apologize. Most people do. But here's something worth remembering. Your education taught you theory, which matters. My experience taught me practice, which also matters. You need both. Just don't assume someone without a degree doesn't know what they're doing. Mitchell nodded slowly. Noted. And thank you. Caleb packed his tools, the weight of the box somehow lighter now, despite nothing having changed physically. He'd done what Victoria hired him to do. Fixed a machine her engineers couldn't repair, saved her $200,000, proved that 25 years of fieldwork counted for something. Victoria appeared as he was closing the toolbox latches. David's report says the machine is operational, should run fine now. Change that intercooler filter every 3 months instead of 6, and audit your maintenance contractors. Morrison was defrauding you. I've already terminated their contract, and I'm considering legal action for fraud. She paused, studying him with those cold, analytical eyes. My office, please. The corner office felt different this time, less intimidating, more like neutral ground. Victoria poured 2 cups of coffee from an espresso machine that probably cost more than Caleb's monthly grocery bill, handed him one without asking if he wanted it. Sit. He took the chair across from her desk. She sat in the adjacent chair rather than behind the desk, a small gesture that shifted the dynamic from boss-employee to something more equal. You saved me $200,000 in 3 weeks of production loss. That's worth significantly more than the $4,000 I agreed to pay you. We had a deal. $500 an hour, 8 hours, $4,000. We also had an understanding that if you succeeded, I'd recognize that value. She pulled out a checkbook, actual paper, not a digital transfer, and wrote with precise strokes. $10,000. Covers today's work plus a consulting fee for the fraud detection. Caleb stared at the check. That's more than generous. That's fair compensation for the actual value you provided. But I'm not done. She set down her pen. I need a chief maintenance officer, someone to oversee all equipment in this facility. 300 machines, $50 million in capital equipment value, salary $120,000 annually, full benefits package, 401k matching. You interested? The question hit like a physical impact. Caleb's hands tightened on the coffee cup, heat burning through the ceramic, but not registering over the roaring in his ears. You're serious. I never joke about business decisions. You demonstrated skill, integrity, and diagnostic ability my educated engineers lacked. But more than that, you have something rare in this industry. You actually care about getting it right rather than covering your ass with procedure. I need that mindset overseeing my equipment. I make $45,000 a year. You're offering almost 3 times that. I'm offering what the position is worth to this company. Your current salary is irrelevant to this conversation. Caleb set the coffee cup down before he dropped it. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider it. You don't need to decide now. Think about it. Talk to your daughter. But Caleb. Her use of his first name felt deliberate, a small bridge across the professional distance. Don't reject this because you don't think you deserve it. You've spent years undervaluing your own worth. Don't let that pattern continue here. The drive home took 20 minutes, but felt like hours. Caleb's brain spun through possibilities and fears in equal measure what this job could mean for Lily's college fund for his retirement. He'd barely started planning for the dignity of walking into work, knowing his skills were recognized and compensated appropriately. But underneath the practical considerations lived darker questions. What if he failed? What if Victoria realized she'd misjudged him? What if he wasn't actually worth $120,000 a year and this whole thing collapsed, leaving him worse off than when he started? Lily was at the kitchen table when he walked in, laptop open, presumably working on college applications or scholarship essays. She looked up, read his face, and closed the laptop. Tell me. So he did. The compressor, The fraud detection, the fix. Victoria's offer. Lily listened without interrupting her expression, shifting from excitement to something more complex, pride mixed with concern. You have to take it. Lil, this is huge. If I fail, you won't fail. Dad, you just saved her company $200,000 in 8 hours. You think she's offering this job because she feels sorry for you. Maybe she's trying to help a single father. Maybe this is charity dressed up as employment. Lily's expression hardened into something fierce. Stop. Stop doing that thing where you convince yourself you don't deserve good things. You've done it my whole life. Anytime something positive happens, you find a way to believe it's either charity or mistake. It's not. You earned this. But honey, if I take this job and mess up, we could be worse off than before. At least now we have stability. This is risk. Life is risk. You taught me that. Remember when I wanted to quit robotics team because I thought I wasn't smart enough? You told me that fear of failure isn't a reason to stop trying. You said, and I still remember this exactly, Lily, you're allowed to be scared. You're not allowed to let that fear make your decisions. Caleb felt those words land like ammunition from his own armory turned against him. I was talking about high school robotics. You were talking about life. And Dad, you're 48. In a year I leave for college. What happens then? You go back to the garage work until you're 70, retire with barely enough to survive. Or do you take a chance that might actually give you the future you deserve? She reached across the table and gripped his hand. You've been invisible because you thought that's what being a good father meant. But I need you to understand something. I'm not leaving you next year because you failed me. I'm leaving because you succeeded. You raised me to be independent, smart, confident. Now it's your turn. Take the job. Build your own life. Her voice cracked slightly on that last sentence, and Caleb realized his daughter wasn't just pushing him toward this opportunity. She was giving him permission to exist as something more than her father. That night, Caleb sat in his garage, the small detached structure behind his house where he kept his personal tools and occasionally worked on neighbors' cars for extra cash. The space smelled like motor oil and sawdust, familiar and comforting in a way few things were anymore. He pulled out his phone, stared at Victoria's business card propped against his toolbox, and made the call before he could reconsider. She answered on the second ring. Caleb, you've made a decision. I have, but I need to say something first. Go ahead. Don't hire me out of pity. Don't hire me because you want to help a single dad. Hire me because I'm the best person for this job. If I fail, fire me without hesitation. I don't want special treatment. The pause lasted 3 seconds. Caleb, I run a $200 million company. I don't do charity. I hire you because you'll make me more money than I pay you. That's the only calculation that matters in business. Clear. Clear. Then my answer is yes. I accept the position. Good. Start Monday, 7 a.m. HR will process your paperwork Friday. Welcome to Cascade Engineering, Chief Turner. One thing. Yes, call me Caleb. If we're going to work together, Ms. Bennett feels too formal. Then call me Victoria. See you Monday. The line went dead. Caleb sat in the garage, silence phone still in his hand, and let himself feel what he'd been suppressing since Victoria first made the offer. Hope. Real, terrifying, exhilarating hope that his life might actually become more than survival mode. Friday's paperwork took 4 hours. Background check, tax forms, benefit enrollment, direct deposit setup. The HR manager, a competent woman in her 50s named Patricia, walked him through everything with professional efficiency that made Caleb grateful he'd brought Lily along. His daughter had a gift for parsing bureaucratic language that he'd never developed. Patricia slid the final form across the table. Your start date is Monday, September 9th. Report to Ms. Bennett's office at 7 a.m. for orientation. Your first paycheck hits in 2 weeks. Any questions? Just one. Is this real? Patricia smiled, the first genuine warmth she'd shown all afternoon. Mr. Turner, I've worked here 12 years. Victoria Bennett doesn't make frivolous hiring decisions. If she offered you this position, you earned it. Welcome to the team. The weekend passed in strange limbo. Caleb cleaned out his locker at the garage, shook hands with his boss, a decent man who wished him luck without resentment, and packed his personal tools. He bought new work shirts, industrial pants that didn't have oil stains, boots that weren't held together with duct tape in two places. Lily watched him prepare with barely concealed delight. "You're getting a whole new wardrobe. I'm trying to look professional. You look like a master mechanic going to an important job," which is exactly what you are. Sunday night, Caleb lay in bed staring at the ceiling and listening to Renton's ambient noise through the open window. Somewhere a dog barked. A car drove past with bass rattling windows. Normal sounds of normal life, except nothing felt normal anymore. 15 years he'd spent in stasis raising Lily and fixing machines and telling himself that was enough. That wanting more was selfish, that a man in his position should be grateful for stability rather than reaching for advancement. But Victoria hadn't offered him advancement. She'd offered him recognition, the acknowledgement that his skills and experience had value beyond hourly wage, that 25 years of work mattered, that he could contribute at a level that transformed a company rather than just maintaining its equipment. His phone buzzed. Text from Victoria. "Ready for Monday." He typed back, "As ready as I'll ever be." "Good. Sleep well. Tomorrow we start building something." Caleb stared at that last sentence. Not, tomorrow you start working. Tomorrow we start building something. Partnership language. Collaborative language. The kind of phrasing that suggested Victoria saw him as more than just an employee filling a role. He set the phone down and closed his eyes, and for the first time in 15 years, Caleb Turner fell asleep without the weight of invisibility pressing down on his chest. Monday morning arrived with autumn rain, the kind of steady Seattle drizzle that turned the world gray and soft. Caleb drove to Cascade Engineering with windshield wipers on intermittent, arriving at 6:45, because old habits die hard and arriving early meant controlling the terms of engagement. Victoria waited in her office dressed in business casual that suggested she'd been there for hours already. The window behind her showed the production floor ramping up for first shift machines coming online in systematic sequence. "Coffee, please." She poured 2 cups, handed him one, and gestured to the window. "This is your responsibility now. Every machine down there needs to run at peak efficiency. Any failure costs us $50,000 a day minimum. Your job is preventing those failures, understood? You'll supervise 8 maintenance techs. They're good people, skilled workers, but they've gotten comfortable. They need someone who understands the difference between maintenance schedules and actual diagnostic work." She turned from the window. "I'm trusting you with the mechanical heart of this company. Don't make me regret it. I won't." "Good. Now let's introduce you to your team." The maintenance shop occupied the northeast corner of the building, a space filled with workbenches, tool chests, parts inventory, and 8 people who stopped working when Victoria walked in with Caleb. "Everyone, this is Caleb Turner, your new Chief Maintenance Officer. He reports directly to me. Whatever he needs, you provide. Whatever he asks, you do." Questions. One man in his 40s raised a hand, stocky graying hair, the look of someone who'd been doing this work since before Caleb started. "Ma'am, we've never had a CMO before. We've always reported to engineering. What changed? 3 weeks of downtime on Unit 7 changed things. Mr. Turner fixed in 8 hours what engineering couldn't solve in 3 weeks. I need that kind of diagnostic thinking, overseeing all our equipment, not just responding to failures." She looked at each person individually. "Give him a chance. That's all I'm asking." Dismissed. Victoria left. 8 pairs of eyes turned to Caleb with expressions ranging from curious to skeptical to openly hostile. The graying man stepped forward. "Rick Martinez. 20 years here. I run this shop." Caleb extended his hand. Rick shook it after a deliberate pause, testing establishing hierarchy. "Caleb Turner. And for the record, I'm not here to take your job. I'm here to make sure equipment failures don't cost people their jobs. If you've been running this shop 20 years, you know this place better than I do. I need that knowledge." Something shifted in Rick's expression. You military Navy. 4 years active, 5 civilian at Puget Sound. Rick nodded slowly. Marines. Iraq first tour. You know how chain of command works? I do. And I know the difference between command and leadership. I'm not interested in ordering people around. I want this shop running so smooth that nobody notices we exist. That's the first smart thing I've heard from management in 5 years. Rick turned to the other 7 techs. Give the man a chance. We'll see what he's got. The first week passed in assessment. Caleb walked every inch of the facility, cataloged every machine, reviewed maintenance logs going back 3 years. He found patterns, equipment failures clustered around shift changes, certain contractors whose work consistently needed redoing, inventory shortages that caused unnecessary downtime. He spent evenings in his garage building spreadsheets and maintenance schedules, tracking failure patterns and projecting when equipment would need preemptive service rather than reactive repair. Lily brought him dinner on a tray, shaking her head at his obsession, but clearly pleased to see him engaged. You're happy? I'm busy. No, you're happy. There's a difference. Busy is what you were before. This is different. You care about this work. Caleb looked up from his laptop. I do. For the first time in years, I feel like what I do matters beyond just paying bills. These machines keep 300 people employed. If I can prevent failures instead of just fixing them, that's job security for families. That matters. Dad, that's called purpose, and you've earned it. By the end of week 2, Caleb had implemented a new maintenance protocol, predictive instead of reactive, based on equipment hours and performance metrics rather than arbitrary calendar schedules. Rick and his team adapted quickly once they understood the reasoning, and within a month, unscheduled downtime dropped by 40%. Victoria noticed. Of course she noticed. She called Caleb to her office on a Friday afternoon, 6 weeks into his tenure. The board reviewed your maintenance metrics. Downtime is down 42%. Cost savings are exceeding projections. They're impressed. Just doing the job. You're exceeding the job. And I want to be clear about something. She stood, walked to the window, the late October sun casting long shadows across the production floor. 6 years ago, my husband Robert Harrington was my business partner. We built this company together from $50 million to $100 million over 10 years. I thought we were partners in every sense. Her voice went flat. Then I discovered he'd been sleeping with our account manager, Jessica. 28. Everything I apparently wasn't warm, uncomplicated, easy. I confronted him. He told me I was cold, that living with me was like living with an ice queen, that Jessica made him feel loved. I'm sorry. Don't be. I divorced him, bought out his shares for $40 million, built this company to $200 million alone. But he retained 30% equity as a silent investor, contract terms I couldn't break. So for 6 years I've run this company solo while my ex-husband sits on the board collecting dividends and reminding everyone I failed at marriage. She turned back to face him. Every night I go home to an empty penthouse. Nobody asks how my day was. Nobody cares if I'm tired or stressed or scared. And people call me strong, independent, badass CEO. But you know what the truth is? What I'm lonely. I built an empire to prove I didn't need him, and I forgot to build a life worth living. Caleb stood, closed the distance between them slowly. You're not invisible to me. Victoria's eyes went bright, but no tears fell. Why do you say that? Because I see you. Not the CEO, not the Ice Queen. I see the woman who built something to prove her worth to someone who didn't deserve her in the first place. And deep down you still wonder if you're actually worth loving. How do you know that? Because I've wondered the same thing every day for 15 years. My wife left with no explanation, just a note saying she couldn't do this. And I've spent 15 years asking myself what I did wrong, whether I was worth staying for. Victoria's breath caught. And did you find an answer? Not yet, but my daughter told me something. Just because someone leaves doesn't mean you weren't worth staying for. It means they weren't capable of staying. The failure was theirs, not mine. Victoria closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, something had shifted a wall, coming down carefully and deliberately. "I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to take this as pressure or expectation. Okay. These last 2 months working with you, seeing how you approach problems, how you treat people, it's reminded me that not all men see women as either trophies or threats. You treat me like a person. That's rarer than you know. You are a person. Just happens you're also brilliant at running a company." Her laugh came out shaky. "I'm not good at this. At personal connection. At vulnerability. I spent 6 years building walls so high nobody could hurt me again. I know something about walls. I imagine you do." They stood in the office, autumn light fading outside, and Caleb felt the space between them charged with possibility and fear in equal measure. This was the moment where he could step back, could maintain professional distance, could keep his life safe and predictable. Or he could step forward into something terrifying and real. "I should go. Lily's expecting me home for dinner." Victoria nodded, but her eyes held disappointment she tried to hide. "Of course. Have a good weekend, Caleb." He made it to the door before turning back. Victoria. "Yes. Would you want to have dinner sometime?" "Not work dinner." "Just dinner." The silence stretched 3 seconds. "Yes, I would like that very much. Tomorrow night, there's a place in Fremont, quiet, good food. Tomorrow works. 7 o'clock. I'll text you the address." Caleb drove home with his hands shaking slightly on the wheel, unable to quite believe what he'd just done. 15 years since he'd asked someone on a date. 15 years since he'd allowed himself to want anything beyond basic survival and Lily's well-being. His daughter met him at the door. "You're smiling. Why are you smiling?" "I have a date tomorrow night." Lily's eyes went wide, then she literally screamed and threw her arms around his neck. "With Victoria, the CEO. Oh my God. Dad, this is amazing. It's just dinner. It's not just dinner, it's you finally letting yourself live." She pulled back, her smile fierce. "What are you wearing? Where are you going? Do you need advice?" Probably yes to that last one. They spent the evening planning what restaurant, what to wear, what to talk about, how to not be awkward after 15 years of romantic dormancy. Lily coached him with the seriousness of a general planning military strategy, and Caleb led her, because this was territory he'd forgotten how to navigate alone. That night, lying in bed, he texted Victoria, "Looking forward to tomorrow." Her response came immediately. "Me too. More than I probably should admit." "Why shouldn't you admit it?" "Because I spent 6 years convincing myself I didn't need anyone. Admitting I want this feels like weakness. Wanting connection isn't weakness. It's human." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Thank you for reminding me of that. Sleep well, Caleb." He set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, feeling like he'd just stepped off a cliff with no idea if there was ground below or just empty air. But for the first time in 15 years, Caleb Turner was willing to fall and find out. The call came at 2:14 in the morning. 3 months after he started at Cascade Date, had turned into weekly dinners, then daily coffee meetings, then the careful construction of something neither Caleb nor Victoria had names for yet, but both recognized as essential. Caleb's phone lit up the darkness of his bedroom. Victoria's name on the screen sending adrenaline through his system before conscious thought caught up. "The plant's on fire. Electrical room, 2nd floor. Fire department says 30 minutes minimum. They need special foam equipment for electrical fires. How bad?" "Don't know yet, but if it reaches the transformer room, we lose everything. 20 million in control systems, all our calibration data." "Caleb, I don't know what to do." Her voice carried something he'd never heard before, fear raw and unfiltered. "I'm coming. Don't let anyone near the electrical room until I get there." He was already moving, grabbing jeans from the floor, the Carhartt jacket with Puget Sound Naval Shipyard still faded on the pocket. His Navy respirator mask sat in the garage, 30-minute oxygen capacity rated for industrial fires. He'd kept it all these years because equipment like that didn't become obsolete, just waited for the moment it became necessary. Lily appeared in her doorway, bleary-eyed. "Dad, what's happening?" "Plant fire. I have to go. That's what fire departments are for. They're 30 minutes out. If the fire reaches the transformers before then, Victoria loses the company. I can't let that happen." Lily's expression shifted from sleepy confusion to sharp concern. "Dad, you could die." "I could. But 300 people lose their jobs if I don't try. That's not acceptable math." He kissed her forehead, grabbed his keys, and ran. The F-150 covered the distance in 12 minutes. Traffic lights meaningless at this hour. Cascade Engineering glowed orange against the night sky, smoke pouring from second-floor windows, while 3 fire engines sat in the parking lot, crews staging equipment but not advancing. Caleb grabbed his respirator and toolbox, ran toward the building, where Victoria stood, arguing with a fire chief in full turnout gear. "Ma'am, we cannot send crews in until Engine 7 arrives with foam equipment. Water on electrical fire creates electrocution hazard for my people, but it's burning now. Can't you do anything? Not without killing my firefighters. I'm sorry." Caleb reached them already. Pulling on the respirator mask. "I'm going in." The fire chief turned. "Sir, you absolutely cannot. I'm Chief Maintenance Officer. I know the electrical layout. If I can kill the main breaker, the fire loses its power source. It'll burn out the existing fuel in minutes. You'll be dead in 5 from smoke inhalation." Caleb tapped the respirator. "Navy-rated 30 minutes of oxygen. I've done worse in worse conditions." The chief looked at Victoria, who stepped between them. "This is my facility. I authorize him. If he wants to go, that's his choice." The chief's jaw worked, but he nodded. "Your funeral, buddy. Make it fast." Caleb started forward. Victoria grabbed his arm, spun him to face her. Her eyes were wet and fierce. "Don't do this. These are just machines. We have insurance. I can't replace you. 300 families depend on this plant. I won't let them lose everything because I was too scared to act. You could die in there. Then I die making sure other people keep their jobs. That's worth the risk." He pulled away gently, adjusted the respirator seal, and ran into the building before she could argue further, or he could reconsider the absolute insanity of what he was attempting. Inside was hell rendered in smoke and heat. The respirator filtered out toxic gases but did nothing for temperature, and Caleb felt sweat break out immediately as he navigated by memory through corridors he'd walked 1,000 times. Emergency lighting cast everything in red smoke, reducing visibility to arm's length. The electrical room was 200 feet from the entrance, up 1 flight of stairs. Caleb took them 2 at a time, one hand on the wall for guidance, the other clutching his flashlight like a lifeline. Heat intensified with each step. 100 degrees, 120, 150. Second floor, east wing. Through the smoke, he could see orange light flickering from the electrical room door, standing open like a mouth-breathing fire. He reached the entrance, and the heat slammed into him like a physical wall. 3 electrical panels fully engulfed flames reaching 6 feet high, cables melting and dripping molten plastic. The transformer room sat 10 feet beyond. If fire reached those units, the resulting explosion would take out half the building. Caleb pulled his jacket over his head and lunged through the doorway, feeling fabric singe as flames reached for him. The main breaker panel occupied the back wall, a lever the size of a baseball bat controlling 480 volts and 2,000 amps of pure electrical current. He grabbed the lever with both hands and pulled. The resistance was an immediate safety mechanism requiring deliberate force to prevent accidental shutdowns. Caleb planted his feet and hauled with everything he had, muscles screaming, heat blistering exposed skin on his neck. The lever moved. 6 inches. 12. Then, with a mechanical clunk that Caleb felt through his bones, the main breaker opened. Every light in Cascade Engineering died. The electrical hum that permeated the building 24 hours a day went silent. And the fire, robbed of its power source, immediately stopped generating new sparks, even as existing flames continued consuming insulation and plastic. Caleb turned and ran, knowing he had maybe 2 minutes before smoke inhalation overcame the respirator's capacity or heat exhaustion shut down his body. The stairwell was blind navigation, now no emergency lights, just his flashlight beam cutting through smoke like a knife through fog. He made it 3 steps before his boot caught something debris. His own feet didn't matter. He went down hard, head slamming into the handrail with enough force to make his vision spark and swim. The flashlight clattered away into darkness. Victoria's voice crackled through the radio the fire chief had given her. Somehow Caleb could hear it through the respirator, through the roaring in his ears. Caleb. Answer me. Where are you? He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. Smoke had filled the stairwell completely, now visibility 0, even if he'd had his flashlight. The respirator kept feeding oxygen, but his body was shutting down from heat and impact trauma and the sudden crash of adrenaline into exhaustion. Lily, he thought. I'm sorry I couldn't keep my promise. Then light pierced the smoke-powerful beams from firefighter helmets, and hands grabbed him under the arms, dragging him toward the exit with professional efficiency that suggested they'd pulled people from burning buildings more times than anyone wanted to count. Cold night air hit his face like salvation. Caleb ripped off the respirator mask, gulped air that tasted like diesel exhaust and rain and life. Paramedics swarmed, checking vitals, shining lights in his eyes, asking questions he couldn't process through the ringing in his ears. Victoria pushed through them, dropped to her knees beside the stretcher they'd laid him on. Tears streamed down her face, cutting tracks through soot she'd accumulated, standing too close to the building. You stupid, reckless, incredible man. You could have died, but I didn't, and the Transformers are safe. I don't care about Transformers, I care about you. The words came out raw and desperate, loud enough that the paramedics and firefighters pretended not to hear while obviously listening to every syllable. Caleb reached up and touched her face thumb, brushing away tears. 300 families keep their jobs because I went in there. That was worth the risk. It'll always be worth the risk. Don't ever do that again. Do you hear me? Don't ever risk your life for my company. Our company. I'm CMO, remember? These are my machines, too. Victoria laughed through tears, the sound breaking into something between a sob and relief. I love you. I know this is terrible timing. We're in a parking lot, you nearly died, but I have to say it because if I don't say it now, I might never have the courage. I love you. Caleb Turner. Silence stretched for 3 seconds while Caleb processed words he hadn't heard directed at him in 15 years. Words he'd convinced himself he'd never hear again, because men who got left behind didn't deserve second chances. I love you too. Have since the day you hired me, when you treated me with respect instead of pity. Nobody ever respected me like that before. Victoria leaned down and kissed him, gentle and fierce simultaneously. While the fire chief called out that the flames were contained, the building was saved, the damage minimal to 3 electrical panels and some cable runs. Caleb kissed her back and tasted salt from her tears and smoke from the air, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. The fire chief approached as they broke apart. Mr. Yamto. Turner, you're either the bravest idiot I've met or the luckiest SOB alive. Fire's out completely. You saved the building. Just did what needed doing. Well, what needed doing almost killed you. Get checked out at the hospital. That's an order, not a suggestion. The paramedics loaded Caleb into the ambulance despite his protests. Victoria climbed in beside him, hand gripping his, like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. At Swedish Medical Center, doctors treated him for minor burn smoke inhalation and a mild concussion from the handrail impact. They wanted to keep him overnight for observation. Victoria used her CEO voice to secure a private room, then sat in the chair beside his bed and refused to leave even when nurses suggested visiting hours were over. You don't have to stay. I absolutely do. Someone needs to make sure you don't sneak out and run into another burning building. That was a one-time thing. You say that now. But I'm learning that when you see people who need help, you run toward danger instead of away from it. That's admirable and terrifying in equal measure. Caleb adjusted the hospital bed to a more upright position. Can I ask you something? Anything. When you said you loved me, did you mean it? Or was it shock talking? Victoria's expression softened into something vulnerable and real. I meant it. I've meant it for weeks, but I was too scared to say it. Because the last time I loved someone, he destroyed me, and I swore I'd never give anyone that power again. But you said it anyway. Because watching you run into fire made me realize something: fear of being hurt isn't a good enough reason to avoid living. You taught me that. Tonight, watching you risk everything for strangers, I understood that some people are worth the risk. Even broken mechanics with trust issues, especially broken mechanics with trust issues. We match, in case you hadn't noticed. Caleb laughed, then winced as his ribs reminded him he'd taken a nasty fall. We do match. Two people who learned to build walls so high nobody could see in. And then a wedding happened and you fixed my elevator and everything changed. Best elevator malfunction of my life. They sat in comfortable silence, Victoria's hand in his, until Caleb's phone buzzed. Lily's name on the screen, along with 17 missed calls and 43 text messages that escalated from concern to panic to fury. I should call her before she drives to the hospital and commits patricide. Probably wise. Lily answered before the first ring finished. Dad. Oh my God, are you okay? I've been calling for hours. I'm fine, honey. Minor burns, mild concussion. They're keeping me overnight for observation. You ran into a burning building. That's not fine. That's insane. 300 people keep their jobs because I ran into that building. Your college fund is secure because that company stays solvent. That's not insane, that's necessary. Silence on the other end. Then Lily's voice came back smaller. Are you really okay? Really, truly okay? Victoria's here with me. She's not letting me go anywhere unsupervised. Good. Because if you died, I would kill you. That's logically impossible. You know what I mean. I do. I love you, Lil. I love you too, Dad. And I'm proud of you. Terrified, but proud. They said goodnight. Caleb set the phone down and found Victoria watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What your daughter is remarkable. Takes after her father. I think it's mutual. You raised each other. Maybe we did. The hospital released Caleb the next morning with instructions to rest for 3 days and avoid strenuous activity for 2 weeks. Victoria drove him home in her Tesla, sleek, silent, expensive, in a way that reminded Caleb their lives still existed in different economic atmospheres, even if their hearts occupied the same space. Lily was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, expression caught between relief and fury. She ran down the steps as Victoria parked, pulled her father into a hug that squeezed his bruised ribs enough to make him grunt. Don't ever scare me like that again. I'll try not to make a habit of running into fires. Lily pulled back, looked at Victoria standing awkwardly by the car like she wasn't sure if she was intruding on a family moment. Thank you for taking care of him. Thank you for raising a man worth taking care of. Something passed between them. Mutual recognition. Respect the careful navigation of women who loved the same man in different ways and were figuring out how that worked. Come inside. I made coffee. And breakfast because Dad needs real food, not hospital garbage. They sat around the kitchen table, the same table where Lily had pushed Caleb to attend the wedding 4 months ago, where breakfast had been shared for 15 years while building a life from broken pieces. Now Victoria sat in the 4th chair that had always remained empty, and somehow it felt natural instead of invasive. Lily poured coffee with the authority of someone who'd been running this household longer than she probably should have. So, you two are serious. It wasn't a question, but Caleb answered anyway. We are, if that's okay with you. Dad, I literally shoved you out the door to go to that wedding because I knew you needed something more than just me in your life. I'm thrilled, but I have questions. Victoria set down her coffee cup. That's fair. Ask anything. What are your intentions with my father? The formality of the question was so absurd that both adults laughed, but Lily's expression stayed serious. I mean it. He's been alone 15 years because Mom destroyed his ability to trust. If you're not serious about this, if this is just a fling, I need to know now. Because I won't watch him get hurt again. Victoria met Lily's fierce gaze without flinching. I'm serious. More serious than I've been about anything except my company in 6 years. Your father reminds me that being successful doesn't mean being alone. He makes me want to be more than just a CEO, and I promise you I will never treat him like he's disposable. Lily studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. Good. Now let's talk about Dad's tendency to play hero without considering consequences. Hey, I'm right here. Exactly. Which means you get to hear this too. For the next hour, Lily and Victoria tag-teamed lectures about risk assessment, proper safety protocols, and the definition of heroism versus reckless endangerment. Caleb listened and nodded and drank coffee, and somewhere in the middle of being scolded by the two most important women in his life, he realized something profound. He'd spent 15 years existing in isolation, and now he was surrounded by people who cared enough to be angry at him for risking himself. That was love. Messy, complicated, frustrating love that came with obligations and expectations and the terrifying vulnerability of mattering to other people. 1 week later, Victoria's office phone rang with a call that would test everything they'd built. Victoria Bennett. The voice on the other end was male smooth, carrying the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, and meant it. Hello, Victoria. It's been a while. Caleb watched her face drain of color, watched her spine go rigid in the way that meant she was preparing for battle. Robert, why are you calling? Because I'm a major shareholder and I heard about the fire. Thought I should check on my investment. Your investment is fine. Insurance is covering the electrical repairs. We lost minimal production time. I'm relieved, but that's not why I'm really calling. Then why I've been reviewing the financials. Operating costs are up $400,000 over the last quarter. Maintenance salaries increased 60%. And I see you hired a chief maintenance officer at $120 annually, 3 times the industry standard for that position. Victoria's hand tightened on the phone. Caleb Turner is worth every dollar. He saved us $220,000 in his first week. Or he saw an opportunity. Vulnerable CEO, recently single wealthy. Perfect target for a blue-collar man looking to upgrade his situation. Caleb stood up, fury burning through his chest. Robert's voice continued through the speakerphone Victoria had activated. I'm calling a board meeting for Monday. Motion to terminate Mr. Turner for conflict of interest. You're dating your CMO, Victoria. That's textbook corporate governance violation. We'll fight this. You can try, but here's the reality. I own 30% of this company per our divorce settlement. If the board votes against me and I feel management is compromised, I can divest completely. Pull $60 million in capital. Your company will be bankrupt in 6 months. The line went dead. Victoria sat frozen, staring at the phone like it was a bomb that had just detonated. Caleb moved around the desk, knelt beside her chair. I'll resign. No. Victoria, he's right about the conflict of interest. I can step down. We can. No. I won't let him bully me into firing the best hire I've made in 5 years, and I definitely won't let him control my personal life. Then what do? We fight. We find a way to buy him out. She picked up her phone, started calculating numbers with the fierce focus she brought to every business challenge. 30% of a $200 million valuation is $60 million. I have $20 million liquid. We'd need to raise $40 million more. I have my house, $320 in equity, and my 401k from the shipyard, $80,000 minus penalties, maybe $56. That's $376,000. Caleb, you cannot risk your house for my company. Our company. And yes, I can. Because if you lose this, 300 families lose jobs. That's not acceptable. You'd be homeless if we fail. Then we don't fail. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to Marcus Reynolds' contact. I have friends, people who trust me. If I can get commitments for small investments, 20 people at 10,000 each, that's another 200,000. And Boeing needs your components. If we pitch this right, they might invest 20 million as a strategic partnership. That's still 20 million short. Then we get creative. Employee investment program, 300 workers, average 10,000 each, that's 3 million. Find small investors through Marcus and his Microsoft network, another few million. Bridge the gap with bank loans. Victoria stared at him like he'd started speaking another language. You're willing to risk everything. Your home, your retirement, your financial security for my company. For 300 families, for American manufacturing, for you. Yeah, I'm willing to risk everything. But if we fail, the principle is the same whether we're fixing machines or building lives. When something is worth fighting for, you fight, no matter the cost. And this is worth fighting for. Victoria's eyes went wet, but she blinked the tears back. You realize you just quoted the exact philosophy that made me fall in love with you. Then let's put that philosophy to work. They spent the weekend building a plan. Caleb called Marcus, who committed 200,000 without hesitation and promised to reach out to his Microsoft network. David Mitchell rallied the maintenance team and engineering department. 180 employees pledged investments averaging 12,000 each, raising over 2 million. Victoria contacted Boeing's VP of Supply Chain, Tom Richardson, who'd visited Cascade multiple times and understood how critical their components were to aircraft production. After a 4-hour pitch meeting Monday morning, Boeing committed $18 million for 9% equity. By Sunday evening, they'd assembled commitments totaling $68 million, $8 million over what they needed to buy out Robert's 30% stake. The board meeting convened Monday at 9 a.m. 8 board members, Victoria, Robert, and Caleb as an observer. Robert wore a suit that probably cost more than Caleb made in a month, his silver hair perfectly styled, confidence radiating like cologne. He opened with the motion to terminate Caleb for conflict of interest. 3 board members, friends of Robert's from the investment world, raised their hands in support. 5 opposed, including David Mitchell representing the employees. The motion failed. Robert's smile didn't waver. Then I invoke Clause 7B of our divorce settlement. I no longer have confidence in management. I'm divesting my full 30% stake. Effective immediately. You can't just... I absolutely can. Contract gives me that right. You have 2 weeks to buy me out at fair market value, $60 million, or I pull all capital and this company collapses. He stood buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate precision. Enjoy bankruptcy court, Victoria. I'll be there to buy the assets at liquidation prices. He walked out. The conference room sat in stunned silence until Victoria spoke, her voice carrying the kind of cold fury that could freeze blood. He thinks he's won. He thinks we can't raise $60 million in 2 weeks. She pulled out a folder, slid it across the table to the board chair. He's wrong. These are commitment letters. 70 million total. 10 million buffer for legal fees and transition costs. Employee investments. Boeing partnership. Bank loans. Private investors. We're buying him out. The board chair, a retired aerospace executive named Margaret Chen, who'd served since Victoria's father founded the company, opened the folder and read with increasing surprise. This is legitimate. Every signature verified. Wire transfers ready to execute pending your approval. Margaret looked up, and for the first time since Robert walked in, she smiled. Then I move, we accept Mr. Harrington's divestment and proceed with the buyout using these committed funds. All in favor. 8 hands raised in unison. Motion passes. Ms. Bennett, draft the paperwork. Mr. Harrington's shares will be purchased within the week. After the board dispersed, Victoria and Caleb stood alone in the conference room. She was shaking adrenaline and relief and the crushing weight of what they'd just accomplished. We did it. You did it. I just made some phone calls. You risked your home. Your retirement. Everything you've built for 15 years. For me, for us, for this company and the people who depend on it. But yeah, for you too. Victoria turned to face him fully. Marry me. The words hung in the air like a challenge and a question, and a leap of faith all compressed into 2 syllables. What? I'm serious. We just bet everything we own on each other. We ran into fire, literal and metaphorical, together. I don't want to date you or eventually move in together or do any of the slow, careful things divorced people are supposed to do. I want to marry you. Is that insane? Completely insane. But I've spent 15 years being careful, and it got me nowhere. You make me want to be reckless. So yes, I'll marry you. They kissed in the conference room where they'd just defeated Victoria's ex-husband, and somewhere in that kiss was everything they'd survived. Abandonment and loneliness and fear transformed into something that looked dangerously close to happiness. 6 months later, Cascade Engineering hosted a celebration. The buyout had finalized, Robert was gone. Boeing's partnership had increased production capacity by 40%, and the company was thriving in ways Victoria's father would have been proud of. The party occupied the production floor on a Saturday, machines silent for once, replaced by tables and a band and 300 employees plus their families. Caleb stood on a small stage, uncomfortable in the suit Lily had insisted he buy, navy blue, properly tailored, no longer the ill-fitting vest from Marcus's wedding. Victoria stood beside him in a green dress that made her look less like a CEO and more like a woman who'd learned that success and happiness weren't mutually exclusive. Most of you know that a year ago I was a mechanic making $22 an hour. Today I'm your COO, and honestly, I'm still not sure how that happened. Laughter from the crowd, warm and genuine. But I learned something this year: value doesn't come from titles or degrees or bank accounts. It comes from what you do when things are hard. Every person in this room has value because you showed up when it mattered. When Robert Harrington tried to destroy this company, 180 of you invested your savings to save it. That's not just business. That's family. Applause erupted. Caleb waited for it to subside. One more thing. Victoria and I are getting married next month. Small ceremony, just immediate family and close friends. But I wanted you all to know because you're part of why we're standing here. You believed in us when we barely believed in ourselves. Thank you. Victoria took the microphone. And because Caleb's too humble to say this, I will. He's not just COO. He's a major shareholder now. The house equity he risked, the retirement funds he invested, those bought him 5% ownership of Cascade Engineering. So when you see him on the production floor, remember he literally put everything on the line for this company and everyone in it. She turned to Caleb, and the microphone picked up her next words clearly. You showed me that protecting something doesn't mean building walls around it. Sometimes it means tearing walls down and trusting that what you build together will be stronger than anything you could build alone. They kissed, and 300 people cheered, and somewhere in the back of the crowd, Lily stood with Margaret Chen, both women smiling like they'd orchestrated the entire thing from the beginning. 1 year after the wedding that changed everything, Caleb and Victoria stood in the backyard of their home. Not his house in Renton anymore, but a place they'd bought together in Bellevue, big enough for Lily when she came home from University of Washington, on breaks, with a garage where Caleb kept his tools because once a mechanic, always a mechanic. 30 people filled the yard. Lily and her new boyfriend Marcus and Jennifer, David Mitchell and his wife Rick Martinez, and the maintenance crew Margaret Chen, who'd become an unofficial grandmother figure, Boeing executives who'd become genuine friends. Caleb stood at the grill flipping burgers while Victoria brought out a pitcher of lemonade, and the mundane domesticity of it made his chest ache in the best possible way. Lily appeared at his elbow. You happy, Dad? Yeah, Lil. I really am. Good, because you deserve it. You always did. You just needed to believe it. Wise words from a college sophomore. I learned from the best. She hugged him, and Caleb held his daughter and looked across the yard at Victoria laughing with Margaret, and thought about how 15 years of invisibility had led to this being seen, being valued, being loved. not despite his scars, but alongside them. Heroes aren't people who never feel fear, he'd told his daughter once. They're people who feel fear and step forward anyway. He'd been afraid that night at the wedding, afraid when Victoria offered him the job, afraid when he ran into fire and when he risked his home and when he said yes to marriage after 15 years of solitude. But fear hadn't stopped him, and that made all the difference. Victoria walked over, slid her arm around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" "How a broken elevator changed my life. Best malfunction ever. Worth every minute of terror. Even the fire. Especially the fire. Because that's when you told me you loved me. Technically, I told you that after the fire in the parking lot while you were on a stretcher." Details. Caleb kissed his wife, and Lily pretended to be scandalized, and somewhere in the gathering dusk of a Seattle summer evening, the sound of laughter rose up from people who'd learned that family wasn't just blood. It was choice, and risk, and the willingness to fight for each other when everything fell apart. The grill needed tending, the burgers were nearly done. Life required constant attention and maintenance, just like the machines Caleb had spent a lifetime fixing. But for the first time in 15 years, Caleb Turner wasn't just surviving. He was living.